By the 1700s, the Catholic Stewarts of Scotland were tired of not being supported by England or Scotland. Robert Stewart loved Glasgow, but he could not tolerate the harsh treatment they endured. He decided to leave his family home and move to Northern Ireland, in an area known as Ulster. Here's the story.
Robert Stewart, my fifth great-grandfather, was born in 1665 near Glasgow, Scotland, in Lancashire. Records of his birth and his marriages are incomplete, but we do know he married twice. He married his second wife, Mary Clark, in Glasgow in 1697. His marriages resulted in the birth of at least 3 children. His firstborn, Samuel Stewart, was born near Glasgow in 1698. He married Mary Maclay early in Ireland, immigrated with his wife and 2 sons to America in 1735, where they settled in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. They had a total of 12 sons and 1 daughter. Robert Stewart, Jr., born near Glasgow, sailed from Belfast, Ireland, with his family to go to America, but was driven back by the weather. He made 3 different attempts, each one unsuccessful. After the third, he abandoned his plan to immigrate, and we have no further account of him. Hugh Stewart. Hugh Stewart, born near Glasgow on June 11, 1719. Hugh accompanied his older brother Samuel and his family to America in 1735. Robert Stewart, brought up by a Covenanter father, had no question about what his religion would be. He readily accepted the faith of the Solemn League and Covenant as his religion. There was no question about his feelings for the English government. The English had caused his father so much grief. They insisted that Scots attend church services that were not theirs. They levied fines on dissenters, and they had unleashed a period of sustained persecution against the Covenanters. No, Robert didn't like the English. Neither did the majority of his contemporaries in Scotland. They had made life so miserable for the Scots that it seemed it could not get any worse. And then it did get worse. Charles II, King of England, died in 1685. His brother, James II, who was not only another Stuart, but a Roman Catholic one at that, succeeded him. He never gained the support of the people of England or Scotland. He began by appointing Roman Catholics to key offices, and then tried to establish freedom of religion in England, but he was unable to reach agreement with the Protestant majority. The Protestant leaders invited James's son-in-law, a Dutchman, William of Orange, to invade England. When James left the country, Parliament claimed that he forfeited the throne of Scotland and abdicated the throne of England, and declared James's daughter Mary and her husband William joint sovereigns in 1689. James tried to regain the throne, was defeated in battle, and went into exile in France in 1690. So having a Dutch Protestant as King of England should not have been too bad. He was not interested in Scotland. The downside to that was that England was dominant, and without English support, Scotland was just a second-class nation. Queen Mary died in 1694 and William in 1702. Then the throne passed to Mary's sister Anne. It was Queen Anne who, in 1707, pushed for the Act of Union that united England and Scotland into a united kingdom. Scotland from that day on was no longer an independent country, and all hopes of that changing were a long way off into the future. Scots were now entirely subservient to the whims and wishes of the English. Now it really was as bad as it could get. What could be worse than having a Scotland under the thumb of the English king? But that got worse too. The English Queen Anne, a Stewart, died in 1714. George I, a German Hanoverian, replaced her. Exiled King James II was still alive and well in France, and his followers, the Jacobites, were anxious to restore the Catholic Stewarts to the British throne. There were a couple of skirmishes. James's son, Bonnie the Prince Charlie, tried to regain the throne when his father's attempts failed, but in the end, the Germans had control of both Scotland and England. Scotland closed down their parliament. Squabbles ended when the English agreed to a Scots Presbyterian established church. It was the biggest sellout in history. The Scots had ceased to be a nation and lost respect in all of Europe. George I was unpopular in England throughout his life, partly because of his inability to speak English, but also because of the perceived greed of his mistresses and rumors concerning his treatment of his wife. It was more than Robert Stewart could bear. He loved his homeland, and he loved Glasgow. It was the home of his ancestors as far back in history as was recorded. It had the image of being progressive. By 1700, Glasgow, with a population of 15,000, was second to Edinburgh as Scotland's largest city. By 1720, it was becoming known as a merchant city, characterized by modernity and the spirit of enterprise. As Daniel Defoe, author of Robinson Crusoe, put it, "'Tis one of the cleanest, most beautiful, and best-built cities in Great Britain." But Robert saw that his country was no longer the Scotland of old. British rule had ousted many Scots who could not tolerate the harsh treatment imposed on them by their own country. Covenanters, specifically, had suffered at English hands. They burned with a zeal that was only intensified by the persecution they had seen. Covenanters fleeing persecution set up churches in Ireland. A Scottish migration to Ireland had started in 1608 with the opening of settlements in County Antrim and County Down. Leased land was made available by royal decree to the Scots on easy terms. One of the problems associated with this benefit for the Scots was that it caused resentment when it denied adequate land for the native Irish to live on. Some of the early settlers in County Down were from the vicinity of Lancashire, where Robert Stewart lived. Upon the death of his father in 1720, when he was 55 years old, Robert moved with his family to Ireland. They located in Dromore, County Down, 12 miles from Belfast. The people of this county were predominantly of Scottish origin. The Ayrshire dialect was commonly spoken until the end of the 18th century. County Down is noted for its hills and rolling surface. It is in the part of Northern Ireland known as Ulster. Located a few miles from Dromore is Downpatrick, the town where the grave of St. Patrick is located. The future years would see troubles develop between the Catholic and Protestant inhabitants of County Down. The established church in Northern Ireland is neither Catholic nor Presbyterian. It's the Church of Ireland, a variation of the Anglican Church of England. Presbyterians in Ireland could practice their religion, but they weren't part of the Church of Ireland. Presbyterians were prevented by law from holding political offices, and sometimes even from having marriages recognized. Most Presbyterians in Ireland were tenant farmers, and many of these households had to supplement their income by weaving for the linen manufacturers in Ulster. Presbyterians were better off than the Catholic Irish and most of the other Protestants in Ireland. Nevertheless, they kept their own culture and stubbornly spoke their own dialect. Robert Stewart and his family lived well while in Dromore and were part of a contingent of Scots-Irish who lived a life free from most of the hassles they had experienced in Scotland. But there were problems as years went on. Tenant farmers were charged larger and larger increases in rents. The famine of 1727 made life even more difficult. A combination of economic, political, social, and religious factors pushed many of the Scots to look to America as the promised land. A new tide of immigrants to America started about 1729. An estimated 12,000 people annually left Ulster's shore. The vast majority were Presbyterians, willing to take their chances at a better life in the New World. The Scots, who had been treated so harshly by the English, would go to America, where they hoped to gain independence for the colonies from English domination. One such group of immigrants from Northern Ireland was Robert Stewart's two sons, Samuel, his wife and family, and Hugh, Samuel's brother. Their destination was land granted to William Penn in the colony of Pennsylvania. From men like these, a link was forged that would see the Ulster Scot Presbyterians making their own Declaration of Independence, such as the Hanover Resolves in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, on June 4, 1774. From this came the format that Thomas Jefferson would use in preparing another covenant, the Declaration of Independence, on July 4, 1776. Robert Stewart died in 1730 in Dromore, County Down, Ireland. The battle for freedom from England would now have to rest on the shoulders of the next generation of Stewarts. When we visited the rector of the Church of Ireland's Christ Cathedral in Dromore in 1999, he said anyone who died in 1730 in Dromore was buried in the cemetery adjoining the cathedral, because there was no other burial ground at that time. We visited the cathedral and the burial ground in Dromore, where I paid my respects to my fifth great-grandfather, Robert Stewart. Our trip to Scotland and Northern Ireland was over. I had found my Scottish ancestors and was now ready to return home and follow the passage of the Stewarts through the country that would become their home, the United States of America.
That wraps up Chapter 3 of Lands Where My Fathers Died by Jack Stewart. The book, which was published in 2012, is available on Amazon if you're interested in purchasing a copy. The story continues next week as Samuel and Hugh Stewart take a long voyage across the Atlantic to begin a new life in colonial Pennsylvania. See you next week.